Hello, this is my presentation on socioeconomic diversity in education. This is being presented by Chelsea Evans from Missouri Baptist University for graduate work on perspectives on diversity in education. Some of the objectives of this presentation are to define what socioeconomic diversity is. And while we look at this diversity, we'll be looking at the lenses of political influences, cultural influences, societal influences, and familial and community influences. And after looking at these four different influences, we'll then look at conclusions that can be drawn and identify the impact that this type of diversity brings into the classroom and how educators can respond to all students to make them successful learners. So we'll start off with what is diversity. Diversity is the inclusion of individuals representing more than one national origin, color, religion, socioeconomic stratum, sexual orientation, and etc. Basically, diversity just means anything that makes someone different. So anything that could be classified as different would make you diverse. So if we look at socioeconomic status as defined by the American Psychological Association is the social standing or class of an individual or group. It is often measured by a combination of education, income, and occupation. So if you take a look over at the graphic to the right, this is a graph from 2004 based on the level of education and then salary that would come along, or average salary that would come along with that. So this is one way that that socioeconomic status would be defined. Now we'll look at political influences. A lot of this research all began with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. This act was passed in 1965 by Lyndon Johnson, and it was the first law that showed the commitment to equal opportunity for all students. With this act came Title I funding and a commitment from our nation to provide equity in education. And as this law continued, it morphed into the No Child Left Behind law of 2002. No Child Left Behind stated that every child would reach proficiency by 2013-2014. Now, again, this was the premise of the law was to ensure equity in education for all learners, including those of lower socioeconomic status. And the purpose behind it didn't necessarily work in reality. So then that law changed and morphed into the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015 that was passed by President Obama. Now, this law was different than the previous No Child Left Behind because it focused on college and career readiness, and it required states to make their own accountability systems that include performance and growth indicators. So as with the No Child Left Behind, schools were being held accountable by meeting their AYP each year and showing that they were, moving towards 100% proficiency. The Every Student Succeeds Act focuses more on a growth mindset and looks at growth indicators rather than just overall proficiency. And with this law, came the Common Core State Standards, more discussion about Title I and how that funding is being used, and then also RTI. As we continue, let's look at cultural influences. Research shows that students coming from lower SES households tend to acquire academic skills at a slower rate than students from higher socioeconomic households. With that knowledge, teachers need to identify students at a young age and provide them with the highest quality of education to promote, those academic skills that they are missing. It's also shown that schools in lower SES areas tend to be under-resourced, which negatively affects the students' academic progress. Also at those schools, there tends to be a lot of teacher turnover rate, which would also negatively affect the students' learning. Students that come from lower SES households can also have behavioral issues at school, and they're not necessarily choosing to be a disruption or have behavior issues, but a lot of the behavior stems from the overwhelming challenges that they are faced with on a daily basis. As we move into cultural influences, I found some risk factors that affect children raised in poverty. And a lot of this is based on Eric Jensen's work, based on his book with Teaching with Poverty in Mind. So some of the risk factors that he talks about are emotional and social challenges, acute and chronic stressors, cognitive lags, and health and safety issues. And if you look at the graph at the right, you can see that throughout the developmental stages, students that are in lower socioeconomic status households tend to always be below the normal trajectory. Those students in those situations, and also ones exposed to chronic stress. So if we look at societal influences, some of the major societal influences would be psychological health, physical health, education, and family well-being. So it's been found that in lower socioeconomic status households, there are higher rates of suicide, smoking, and heavy drinking. There's also higher levels of emotional and behavioral issues, such as anxiety, depression, and ADHD. There's also higher levels of aggression within those students. Some of the issues with the physical health of these students would be higher likelihood to become sedentary in adulthood, a higher BMI, and a higher risk for cardiovascular disease as an adult. Some of the educational issues that we've already discussed, but are also part of the societal influences, would be achievement gaps. They have less linguistic knowledge, especially early on. They have a higher percentage of absenteeism, and on average they tend to score 10% lower on national achievement tests than the average student. And they also have a higher dropout rate. When concerning family well-being, families with the lower SES are usually a reliable predictor of abuse and neglect. They also are linked to domestic crowding and are more likely to become victims of violence. Many family members in lower SES households did not have positive experiences with school. So many of these family members don't see school as a positive environment and don't see the value of education. And that's something as educators that we need to be cognizant of and work to build positive relationships with those people. Many family members within these households are also working multiple jobs, and older siblings are often watching younger siblings to help provide basic needs. So some of the basic needs within Maslow's hierarchy of needs are not being met, and that's something that we also need to be aware of and work to provide for those students in ways that they are needed. Families coming from a lower SES situation are often dealing with chronic stressors, which tend to lead to more behavioral issues and anxiety and depression and ADHD issues, as discussed before. So some conclusions that could be drawn is that as educators, we must have an understanding of each of our students and their individual backgrounds. This goes beyond just understanding how the student learns best. We need to take a personal interest in each one and where they stand within the world. And understanding the environment in which they come from and their view of the world will allow us to connect with them at deeper levels and enhance their learning. Teachers also need to be aware of our students who may not be having the basic needs met and work to meet those basic needs through school programming. The building that I work in is Title I funded, and we are able to provide free breakfast school-wide. And as a teacher, making sure that students are taking advantage of this program and having breakfast ensures that they're having at least 1 to 2 meals a day, lunch and breakfast then. And it's a important part of having their basic needs met. And through other programs like counseling and backpack programs and things like that, meeting those needs that they may not be getting at home. We must also take early action to support our learners who come from these situations to make their educational experience more equitable and give them an academic knowledge base to ensure success throughout their educational experience. So by taking early action, we need to start identifying students, kindergarten, first grade, that are needing some academic support through RTI and provide for them high quality learning experiences so that we can fill those gaps to ensure their success. And here is my bibliography. A lot of what I found was found through the U.S. Department of Education, the United States Census Bureau, the Association for Curriculum and Development, the American Psychological Association, and Teaching with Poverty in Mind by Eric Jensen.